in the book. Of course, in the beginning comes the old Capitol. This photograph is from 1865 and was taken, as you can see, the steps were full on the old Capitol on the east side of the building that day. This was the memorial for Lincoln shortly after he was assassinated. You can still see the fencing around the Pentecrest. In fact, the job descriptions, the contracts with faculty in the first half a century at the university included cleaning of the grounds and keeping cattle off of the Pentecrest area. It wasn't called the Pentecrest at that time, but the grounds of the old Capitol. The building itself, of course, was our original state capitol, and when the capital of the state of Iowa, as most know, moved to Des Moines, the state designated this as what would then become our oldest permanent building on campus. And has served many functions through the years, but it was a slow first half a century on our campus. There weren't a lot of buildings being built, a lot of cheaper buildings, meaning that they used cheaper materials in the buildings. And surrounding the old Capitol, buildings like this one, which does still exist, Calvin Hall, was originally just northeast of the old Capitol, and now sits across Jefferson Street because in 1905, and we tell the story in the book, in 1905 we moved that building across the street to make way for other buildings on the Pentecrest. It was a remarkable feat at that time in 1905. You can see the horses down in the lower right, and both the teams of horses and teams of men that were on the site. They moved the building 2 feet a day and continued to teach classes in it while they moved it. It was also rotated 90 degrees, so a remarkable feat, and it then remains as one of the last or it is the last remaining brick architecture from what we now call the Pentecrest. A turn in the university, and actually, in fact, for many other universities, came in 1893. The Columbian Exposition in Chicago was held, and this is a photograph from that, and many people hear about the White City, and it was the introduction of this kind of architecture as a city beautiful movement, as they called it, and many campuses echoed the attention that was put on Chicago in 1893 with the notion of Beaux-Arts classical architecture becoming an anchor for the campuses. And in fact, shortly after 1893, it was something that was looked at as the direction the university would go. Of course, they had even this rendering, and renderings like this were done. You can see all of the campus rendered in white, and ultimately the Pentecrest was set up to follow those ideals with the old Capitol in the center and 4 classical buildings flanking it. So very much in the style of the 1893 Exposition, and many other campuses followed suit with that. Of course, the buildings that are on the Pentecrest, Schaefer, McLean, McBride, and Jessup Hall, all have neat and ornate ways of detailing the interests of the university at the times. We show these photographs in the book as well, but we talk in the book about, in fact, each of the entries is in general by format 2 paragraphs, one being the story behind the building and the other being an analysis of the architecture. So one can start to look up at the details in McBride Hall and see things that we might not see otherwise. And so those are some of the details that are included in the book. And then we come to the modern iconic structures, and we've had quite a few of them in the last couple of decades, but buildings of note. Of course, in 1983, CRS out of Houston designed this building, Carver Hawkeye Arena. It serves as a great symbol for the athletic department, but is also a building that has stood the test of time. Now, these buildings do age, as I mentioned, and we will be working on renovation projects. It's been in the news that we'll be doing renovation to this and other projects, but this is a very strong building. It was the first building on our campus that received the National Award for Design by the AIA. Next, in 1986, the Boyd Law Building, designed by Gunnar Burkitz, up on the west banks of the Iowa River. It's an interesting building in that a circle's a tough one to add on to. We're running out of room for the College of Law, and you can't put an addition on a circle very easily. So we'll be working on those things in future years. And of course, one of the more famous buildings on our campus, Frank Geary's IADEL structure. This building received some level of controversy as well. In fact, there's a wing of this building that is located right here. If you were to visit the site, you would see the concrete footing in the ground. The building was actually bid in 2 pieces. We bid the foundation of the building first and then built the foundation. Then we bid what is above the ground. And Frank Gehry, it's a very important building in that Frank Gehry had built mostly rectilinear buildings before this point. This became the first building that turned the corner where he started taking metal shapes and putting them together in various components. He went to more curvilinear examples later, but this became that first direction he took towards Bilbao and other places like that. So it's very important, but it was also very difficult to build and ahead of its time in the construction world. And so when we bid the main part of the building, the bids were very high and well over the funding for the project. And in the end, the university determined that that one wing that is located right here would not be built, and Frank Gehry didn't find pleasure in the fact that we changed his design. In fact, he claimed that the building was no longer his. He didn't have anyone to celebrate the building with. Interestingly enough, we've received word that he's starting to include this building again on his resume. So it is, and I think he's recognized, it is an important building in the history of Frank Gehry and in the history of modern architecture. So we're proud to have it on campus. As you can see, it shines from the Iowa River. It's not always the location that most see it, but a beautiful building from the river. Charles Gwathmey of Gwathmey and Siegel Architects in New York City did our Levitt Center for University Advancement. In 1998, this building was finished, and again, a building that reads wonderfully in the evening as well. A lot of glass block and a great entrance to the campus from the north side. And our latest gem, and I don't know how many have had a chance to visit it, but if you haven't, you really should. This building, designed by Stephen Hull, is our newest addition to the Arts Campus. It doubles the size of our art and art history programs. Was finished and dedicated this last fall. And this winter, in January, this building was one of 700 buildings that were entered into an international competition for the AIA Institute Award, and only 11 buildings worldwide were designated award winners for that, and this was one of them. So not only a top building on our campus, but this building is both well received and well published throughout the world, and it's a wonderful building both outside and in, thoroughly modern, but with the use of the Corten steel on the outside, the pre-weathered Corten steel. It is intended to feel as a courtyard with the original 1936 brick architecture, and again, just as dynamic inside. So if you have a chance to visit this building, I'd certainly invite you to do so. Finally, a brief look ahead. I've talked about a lot of buildings, and our campus is certainly about buildings. We're known by visiting architects and by other campuses that come here for our architecture and our diverse architecture. Since 2002, we have completed 14 new buildings on our campus. So the activity on our campus, much thanks to the Good, Better, Best campaign that the foundation completed, a $1 billion campaign in advance of many things, including architecture. When we look to the next 10 years, as I mentioned, part of my role at the university is to work on our master plan. And we rolled out a new master plan for the campus in 2006. And the next 10 years is, I suppose, a prediction, a crystal ball look at our campus. There are two things, I think, that will headline our campus. One is our heritage. Looking at the buildings, we've now finished Schaefer Hall in the old Capitol. It leaves 3 buildings on the Pentecrest that are in need of modernization, need to bring them back, protect them for heritage and historical reasons, but also make them very usable buildings in a teaching environment. There are other buildings of ours that are aging as well and mean a lot to our campus, and so we'll be looking at our heritage and the protection of our heritage in the next 10 years, as well as I mentioned on this, our landscape. The Iowa River is a unique resource that both we and Iowa City have, and yet most of the university tends to turn its back to the Iowa River. We're starting some projects, as you'll see a little bit later, that will start to turn our attention back to the river, to engage the river and make it a gathering place, both for the university as well as the community. So we're going to be looking at taking our landscape to a new level, and those are the kinds of things that become very important in a diverse architecture setting. We need the landscape to become the fabric that ties all of those different kinds of architecture together.